New York City, 1990. The marble floors of Wall Street gleamed under the weight of ambition. In a corner office high above the chaos, Bernard Madoff sat behind a desk polished to a mirror's shine. His tailored suit, his calm demeanor, his reputation as the man who could turn risk into reward. These were the armor he wore. To the world, he was a titan of finance, a legend who had built a fortress of trust brick by brick. But beneath the veneer of respectability, a different man existed. One who would soon orchestrate the largest financial fraud in history. Madoff wasn't born into wealth. He started with nothing but a fishing tackle business run out of his parents' garage in Queens. By day, he repaired rods. By night, he studied stock tickers. His first real break came in 1960 when he founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. At the time, Wall Street was a club of old-money elites who sneered at outsiders. But Madoff had a gift. He made complex markets feel simple. He promised steady returns, not explosive gains, the kind that lured cautious investors like moths to a flame. For decades, he played the long game, cultivating relationships with charities, celebrities, and even the ultra-wealthy like Steven Spielberg and Kevin Bacon. By the 1990s, his name was synonymous with trust. Yet the cracks began early. In 1992, a young analyst named Harry Markopolos tried to unravel Madoff's strategy. He sent regulators a report titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud," laying out mathematical impossibilities in Madoff's returns. But no one listened. Why would they? Madoff had dined with presidents, advised the SEC, and donated to every cause that mattered. When Markopolos pressed further, Madoff's team dismissed him as a nobody with a grudge. The truth? Madoff's returns weren't generated by genius. They were paid for with the money of new investors. A Ponzi scheme perfected over 40 years. The real horror wasn't the scale of the fraud. It was how ordinary it felt. Madoff didn't wear a villain's cape. He was the neighbor who fixed your kid's bike, the uncle who gave sound advice at Thanksgiving. His office had no velvet ropes, just a modest door on the 17th floor of a midtown skyscraper. Clients walked in, handed over checks, and left with promises of 10% annual returns every year, even during market crashes. How? Madoff claimed to use a split-strike conversion strategy, a term so technical it silenced doubters. In reality, there was no strategy, just ledgers filled with lies. Consider the story of Ruth and Saul Katz. Retired teachers from New Jersey, they invested $3 million with Madoff over 20 years. Every quarter, their account statements arrived, showing steady growth. They trusted him like family until 2008, when they tried to withdraw funds for their granddaughter's college tuition. The request went unanswered. Weeks later, they learned their life savings had never existed. Madoff's empire wasn't built on stocks or bonds. It was built on them. This was the genius of Madoff's deception. He weaponized normalcy. While other fraudsters flaunted private jets, Madoff drove a beat-up Honda. While they threw lavish parties, he hosted quiet dinners with clients. He understood that trust isn't earned through spectacle. It's earned through consistency. And for decades, he was consistent. The SEC investigated him 7 times and found nothing. How? Because Madoff didn't just bribe regulators, he became them. He chaired NASDAQ, shaped trading rules, and mentored future SEC commissioners. The system wasn't broken. It was designed for him to exploit. But the most chilling detail? Madoff didn't need to steal billions. At his peak, he managed $65 billion, more than the GDP of Jordan. Yet he lived modestly, never flashing wealth. Why? Because the thrill wasn't the money. It was the control, the power to decide who prospered and who perished with a stroke of his pen. In 2008, when the financial crisis hit, even Madoff's illusion began to fray. Investors demanded withdrawals. The machine needed fresh blood, but the well had run dry. And in that moment, the man who had mastered the art of trust realized something terrifying. He was trapped by his own lie. By December 10, 2008, the end was inevitable. Madoff called his sons into his Manhattan apartment. He confessed, not out of guilt, but because the math had caught up with him. The scheme, A house of cards built on decades of deception was seconds from collapse. What followed wasn't a dramatic arrest, but a quiet surrender. Madoff walked into federal court wearing a navy blazer, no tie, as if heading to a routine meeting. The world would later learn the truth. He'd stolen $64.8 billion. But in that moment, all anyone saw was a frail, 70-year-old man, still wearing the mask of the trusted face of finance. The human mind craves certainty. In a world of stock crashes and economic chaos, Bernard Madoff offered something rare: guaranteed returns. While the S&P 500 swung wildly, his clients saw 1% gains month after month, year after year. It wasn't flashy, it was reassuring. And that's exactly why they didn't question it. Take the case of Fred Wilpon, owner of the New York Mets. In 2007, Wilpon's team was valued at $800 million, but his Madoff account showed $500 million in profits alone. When skeptics asked how, Wilpon shrugged, "Bernie's just that good." That was the mantra of Madoff's inner circle. His returns weren't scrutinized because they fit. They aligned with the narrative of a genius who'd cracked the market's code. Even when the math defied logic, investors chose comfort over curiosity. Madoff's real weapon was exclusivity. He didn't chase clients, he made them beg. To invest with him, you needed an introduction from someone already in the fold. This wasn't just marketing, it was psychological warfare. Being chosen by Madoff triggered the same dopamine rush as winning a VIP invite to a sold-out concert. Clients like actor Zachary Quinto later admitted, "It felt like being part of a secret society, and secrets, by nature, resist scrutiny." Then there were the feeder funds. Entities like Fairfield Greenwich Group acted as middlemen, funneling billions to Madoff while taking hefty fees. Their pitch? Madoff's too busy for small investors, but we'll get you in. What clients didn't know: these funds never verified his trades. They took his word as gospel. When one investor, J. Ezra Merkin, earned $500 million in commissions for directing money to Madoff, he never once audited the accounts. Why? Because questioning Madoff felt like questioning gravity. The allure of guaranteed wealth blinded even the sharpest minds. Nobel laureate Harry Markowitz, pioneer of modern portfolio theory, invested $4 million with Madoff. When asked why, he said simply, "Everyone else was doing it." That's the insidious power of social proof. When your peers, your friends, your mentors are all invested, doubt becomes social suicide. Madoff didn't just sell a scheme, he sold belonging. By 2006, red flags were everywhere. Madoff's auditor was a three-person firm operating out of a strip mall. His trading desk was a single employee clicking buttons on a 1980s-era computer. Yet when a client, Carl Shapiro, asked for proof of trades, Madoff sent a handwritten note, "I don't have time for this." Shapiro, a Holocaust survivor who'd built a billion-dollar retail empire, withdrew $500 million, but left $500 million still inside. Why? Because even after suspicion, the comfort of Madoff's narrative was too strong to abandon. The final piece of the puzzle was time. Madoff didn't scam people in a week or a month. He did it over decades. A client who invested $1 million in 1980 would see $10 million by 2000, not through compounding, but through fabricated statements. Each gain reinforced the illusion, creating a feedback loop of trust. By the time the 2008 crisis hit, many clients had more than half their net worth tied to Madoff. They weren't just investors. They were hostages to their own hope. And when the collapse came, the betrayal cut deepest where trust was strongest. Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Peace Prize-winning Holocaust survivor, lost $15 million, the endowment for his humanitarian foundation. His words after the fraud was exposed: "Bernie was a great guy. I cannot believe it." That's the tragedy of Madoff's genius. He didn't just steal money. He stole the certainty that good people exist in a broken world. December 2005. Harry Markopolos sat in a windowless SEC office in Boston, his palms sweating against a manila folder labeled Madoff fraud evidence. Across the table, an investigator named Eric Swanson, Madoff's future son-in-law, barely glanced at the documents. Markopolos had spent 9 years dissecting Madoff's returns. His calculations were irrefutable. Madoff's claimed 1.8% monthly gains defied statistical possibility. It's mathematically impossible, Markopoulos insisted, sliding a chart across the desk. The investigator sighed, closed the folder and said, "We'll look into it." They never did. This wasn't the first warning ignored. In 1999, Madoff's auditor was a three-person firm called Freeling and Horowitz, operating from a strip mall in Suffern, New York. Their office? A single room above a bagel shop, with a secretary who doubled as the CPA. When regulators asked how they audited $17 billion in assets, the firm's owner, David Freeling, shrugged. "Bernie handles the numbers." Freeling signed off on fake reports for 15 years, never once verifying a trade. His fee? $35,000 annually. Meanwhile, Madoff's trading desk was a single employee, Frank DiPascali, clicking entries into a 30-year-old computer. No trades existed. No markets were touched, just spreadsheets glowing under fluorescent lights. The red flags multiplied like ghosts in the machine. In 2001, Madoff's returns stayed steady while the dot-com bubble burst. Investors like philanthropist Jeffrey Pickar asked how. Madoff waved dismissively, "My strategy is proprietary." Yet when Pickar demanded proof, Madoff sent a handwritten note, "I don't have time for this." Pickar withdrew $500 million, but left another $500 million behind. Why? Because Madoff had woven himself into Pickar's life. They vacationed together in Palm Beach. Madoff attended Pickar's daughter's wedding. Trust wasn't a transaction. It was blood. Then there was the split-strike conversion myth. Madoff claimed to use this complex option strategy to generate steady returns. But when finance professor Ezra Zuckerman studied it, he found a fatal flaw. The strategy required massive market volatility to work. Yet Madoff's returns stayed smooth during calm markets. Zuckerman published his doubts in 2004. Madoff's response? He called Zuckerman's dean and demanded the paper be retracted. It wasn't, but no investor cared. To them, volatility was noise. Madoff's consistency was gospel. The most chilling oversight happened in 2006. Madoff's brother Peter, his own compliance officer, discovered a $100 million discrepancy in the books. Confronted, Madoff blamed a clerical error. Peter reported it to the SEC. Investigators arrived with subpoenas. Madoff greeted them with coffee and cookies, then handed over forged trade records. The SEC left satisfied. Later, Madoff's employee DiPascali admitted, "We just made up the numbers on the spot." The regulators never checked a single trade with a third party. Even Madoff's victims saw the cracks but chose blindness. Ruth Katz, the retired teacher, noticed her account statements arrived in plain envelopes. No bank logos, no security watermarks. When she asked, Madoff's secretary said, "Bernie prefers simplicity." Another client, Shauna Madoff, Bernard's niece, worked in compliance yet never questioned why her uncle's firm had no real-time trading feeds. "It was family," she later testified. "We didn't look." The deeper truth? Madoff wanted them to look away. He paid clients like Norman Levy $1 million annually just to refer new investors, no questions asked. Loyalty was purchased, not earned. By 2007, the warnings were screaming. Madoff's returns suddenly spiked to 2.5% monthly, impossible during market turmoil. When investor Robert Jaffe pressed him, Madoff snapped, "Do you want the money or not?" Jaffe withdrew $50 million but kept $300 million invested. His reasoning? Bernie had never missed a payment in 30 years. That consistency was the trap. While other funds lost 20% in 2007, Madoff clients saw 12% gains. Felt like magic. In reality, it was math's worst nightmare. A scheme devouring itself. The final red flag arrived with the 2008 crash. As markets bled, Madoff's returns stayed untouched. Investors like philanthropist Elie Wiesel called in panic. Madoff's reassurance? "I'm good for it." But behind closed doors, the machine was choking. New investors vanished. Withdrawals surged. Madoff's employee DiPascali frantically called feeder funds, Send more money now. One fund manager, J. Ezra Merkin, wired $2.4 billion in October 2008 alone, knowing Madoff had no real assets. Why? Because Merkin earned $500 million in fees. Greed had become a religion, and Madoff was its prophet. On December 9, 2008, the last thread snapped. Madoff's sons, Mark and Andrew, confronted him about a $173 million withdrawal request from client Robert Jaffe. Madoff locked himself in his study for hours. When he emerged, his face was ash. "It's all just one big lie," he whispered. The next morning, he called the FBI. Not out of remorse, but because the numbers had finally broken him. The empire built on ignored warnings, on strip mall auditors and handwritten excuses, had collapsed under its own weight. And the cruelest truth? Every red flag had been visible. They were just hidden in plain sight. Imagine a clockwork machine with no gears. That's what Madoff's empire truly was. At its peak, it moved $65 billion, not through trading, but through a ritual as old as deception itself. Every Monday morning, Frank DePascali, Madoff's operations chief, would sit at his desk in the 17th floor office. He'd open a spreadsheet titled Composite Statement. Then, with a few keystrokes, he'd invent returns for thousands of clients. A 1% gain here, a 1.2% there. Consistent, calm.
Impossible.
The mechanics were elegantly simple. When new investors wired money, $1 million from a charity, $5 million from a celebrity, DePascali would deposit it into Madoff's personal account. Then he'd fabricate trade confirmations showing fake options trades. Meanwhile, when existing clients demanded withdrawals, Madoff used new deposits to pay them. It was a perpetual motion machine fueled by trust. In 2007 alone, $20 billion flowed in while $18 billion flowed out. The $2 billion difference?
Pure fiction.
Madoff called it the split-strike conversion. Investors called it magic. But the real engine was fear. Madoff trained clients to never ask questions. When philanthropist Carl Shapiro requested proof of trades, Madoff's secretary snapped, "Bernie doesn't answer to anyone." Shapiro withdrew $500 million but left $500 million invested, terrified of losing access. Others, like actor Kevin Bacon, stayed silent because Madoff held their social capital hostage. At charity galas, Madoff would whisper, "Your foundation's payout is next quarter." Withdrawals became threats to their livelihoods. The scheme wasn't just financial, it was psychological warfare. The feeder funds were the lifeblood. Entities like Fairfield Greenwich Group acted as gatekeepers, funneling $7.5 billion to Madoff. Their sales pitch? "Bernie's too exclusive for small investors, but we'll get you in for a 1% fee." What they didn't say, they never verified a single trade. When SEC investigators asked Fairfield Greenwich for proof, CEO Walter Noel handed over Madoff's forged statements. "We trusted Bernie," Noel later testified. He was the SEC's former chairman. The irony? Madoff had shaped SEC rules for decades. He wasn't evading regulators, he was the system. Inside the office, the fraud was mundane. Madoff's trading desk was DePascali and two assistants. They used a 1980s-era computer running outdated software. No live market feeds.
No brokers.
Just spreadsheets filled with numbers pulled from thin air. When DePascali needed to generate returns, he'd flip a coin. Heads for positive, tails for negative. The consistency? A carefully curated illusion. During the 2000 tech crash, Madoff's clients saw steady gains while the Nasdaq plummeted 78%. How? DePascali simply typed higher numbers. The market didn't matter. Only the narrative did. The collapse began quietly. In September 2008, as Lehman Brothers imploded, Madoff's clients panicked. Withdrawal requests hit $7 billion. But new deposits had dried up. DePascali called feeder funds hourly. "I need $500 million by Friday." One fund manager wired $1.2 billion in 3 days, knowing it was a black hole. Why? Because his own investors demanded Madoff returns. The scheme had become a hydra. Cut off one head, two more demanded blood. By December, Madoff was paying withdrawals with money from his own family foundation. The founder was now a victim of his creation. On December 10, 2008, the machine seized. Madoff's sons confronted him about a $173 million withdrawal. Madoff led them to his study, closed the door and said, "I've been living a lie. It's all gone." Andrew Madoff called the FBI immediately. Agents arrived to find Madoff calm, almost relieved. "I'm so sorry," he told them. "I've ruined thousands of people." But the real horror wasn't the theft. It was the banality. No offshore accounts.
No Swiss bolts.
Just a man who'd spent 40 years moving numbers between fake accounts, believing he could outrun arithmetic forever. As news spread, the dominoes fell. Ruth Katz called her husband, "Our life savings gone." Elie Wiesel's foundation collapsed. Kevin Bacon's charity lost $5 million. But the deepest cuts were invisible. In Palm Beach, a widow named Lily Klein overdosed on pills after losing her inheritance. In London, a Holocaust survivor hanged himself. Madoff hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen the future. And as federal agents seized his Honda Accord and modest apartment, the truth was inescapable. The greatest fraud in history wasn't built on genius. It was built on silence. The phone rang at 3:17 a.m. in Boca Raton. Ruth Katz fumbled for the receiver, her knuckles still raw from the porcelain sink she'd gripped all night. On the other end, a voice she'd known for 20 years, Bernard Madoff's secretary, spoke in clipped syllables. "Ruth, there's been an issue with the account. We'll call back tomorrow." The line went dead. Ruth stood frozen in her kitchen, the glow of the microwave clock painting her face blue. Outside, palm trees swayed under a full moon. Inside, the life she'd built with Saul, 23 years of teaching, summer vacations in Maine, the college fund for their granddaughter, had just evaporated. Ruth wasn't alone. In a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Elie Wiesel stared at the same phone call. His foundation, dedicated to rescuing Holocaust survivors from poverty, had $15.2 million in Madoff's vaults. That money vanished overnight. The next morning, Wiesel's assistant found him slumped at his desk, a handwritten letter to survivors crumpled in his fist. "I have failed you when you needed me most." For months, the Nobel laureate refused to speak publicly. His silence wasn't grief, it was shame. The man who'd survived Auschwitz couldn't protect his own people from a different kind of monster. Then there was Lily Klein, a 68-year-old widow in Palm Beach. She'd entrusted Madoff with $4.3 million, the inheritance from her husband, a decorated Marine who'd died in Vietnam. When the news broke, Lily sat alone in her sunroom, staring at the photo of him in uniform. She called her financial advisor. "Is there any chance?" The pause before the answer was a guillotine. That night, she swallowed a bottle of Xanax with a glass of Merlot. Paramedics found her breathing but unconscious, her wedding ring clutched in her palm. She'd written "Bernie took Jack twice" on the bathroom mirror in lipstick. The destruction spread like a virus. In Scarsdale, New York, the Rosens lost $8 million, their entire retirement gone. David Rosen, 72, a retired oncologist, walked into his garage and started his Mercedes. The carbon monoxide filled the space in 17 minutes. His wife found him still wearing his reading glasses, a Madoff account statement on the passenger seat. In London, Holocaust survivor Max Windmuller hanged himself in his study. His daughter later told investigators. He said Madoff was his last hope to rebuild what the Nazis stole. Even celebrities weren't spared. Actor Kevin Bacon's charitable foundation lost $5 million. The money meant to fund arts programs for underprivileged kids. At a press conference, Bacon's voice cracked. "We were going to build a theater in Philadelphia. Now there's nothing." Director Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation lost $12 million. Spielberg canceled a film premiere to personally call elderly survivors whose stipends vanished. One woman, 94-year-old Miriam Abramovich, wept as she described choosing between insulin and food. "Bernie promised he'd protect us," she whispered. "He said we'd never be hungry again." The deepest wounds were invisible. Families fractured under the strain. At a Thanksgiving dinner in 2009, the Katz family erupted when Ruth's son demanded to know Why you gave him all our money. Saul slammed his fist on the table. He was our friend. He came to your bar mitzvah. By Christmas, Ruth and Saul were living in separate apartments, hers paid for by her daughter's credit card. In Palm Beach, Lily Klein's children stopped speaking after her overdose. Her son blamed her for trusting a stranger. Her daughter blamed him for not understanding her pain. Madoff's victims weren't just numbers. They were the fabric of American life. Teachers who'd stayed late to tutor struggling kids, nurses who worked double shifts during epidemics, veterans who donated to charities while living on VA checks. When the SEC finally released the victim list, it read like a census of decency. Among them, Sister Rosemary, a nun who lost $2.1 million meant for a homeless shelter, Rabbi David Saperstein, whose temple's endowment vanished, and 87-year-old Holocaust survivor Fritzi Fritzschall, who'd rebuilt her life after Auschwitz only to lose her savings to a Jewish con man. The aftermath was a slow suffocation. Ruth Katz took a job cleaning offices at night, her arthritic hands scrubbing toilets at 65. Elie Wiesel canceled his speaking tours, too ashamed to face survivors. Lily Klein survived the overdose but never spoke again. She communicated by tapping Morse code on her nurse's palm. When Madoff's victims finally gathered at a bankruptcy hearing in 2009, the room smelled of antiseptic and despair. A woman in the front row clutched a photo of her dead husband. He worked 3 jobs to save this money. Now I have to sell our house. The trustee nodded, his eyes avoiding hers. Behind them, a poster read, "Total losses, $64.8 billion. Below it, someone had scrawled in red marker, "But what about our lives?" December 10, 2008. 8:47 a.m. Bernard Madoff sat at his kitchen table in his Upper East Side apartment, stirring sugar into weak tea. His hands didn't shake. He'd rehearsed this moment for months. Across from him, his sons Mark and Andrew, both executives at his firm, stared at the spreadsheet glowing on Andrew's laptop. $173 million. That's what client Robert Jaffe demanded yesterday. The number pulsed like an open wound. Madoff knew the truth. There was nothing left to pay it. Mark broke the silence. "Dad, what is this?" Madoff didn't look up. "It's all just one big lie." Andrew's voice was a whisper. "How long?" "Decades," Madoff said, still stirring. "Since the 80s. Maybe earlier." At 9:03 a.m., Andrew Madoff called the FBI. His hands trembled so violently he dialed twice. By 10:17, federal agents swarmed the 17th floor of 165 Broadway. They found Frank DePascali, Madoff's operations chief, shredding documents in a panic. "Stop!" DePascali screamed at the agents. "You don't understand. He'll kill us." In Madoff's office, they seized 3 ledgers. One held the names of victims. Another listed withdrawals. The third was blank, just a title, "The End." Madoff walked out at 11:02 a.m. No handcuffs. No dramatic arrest. He wore a navy blazer, khakis, and scuffed loafers, the uniform of a man heading to lunch. Reporters shouted questions as he climbed into a black sedan. He didn't flinch. "I'm so sorry," he told the agents. "I've ruined thousands of people." The words hung in the icy air. By noon, the dominoes fell. At 12:15, the SEC froze Madoff's assets. At 1:03, the New York Stock Exchange halted trading in his firm's stock. At 2:47, news broke on CNBC. Ponzi scheme collapses. $50 billion vanishes. In Palm Beach, Lily Klein swallowed the Xanax. In Boca Raton, Ruth Katz called her bank and learned her account was frozen. In Tel Aviv, Elie Wiesel's assistant found him staring at a blank page, a pen bleeding ink onto his desk. The real collapse happened in the silence. At 3:30 p.m., Madoff's wife Ruth called her social secretary. "Cancel everything. Forever." By 4 o'clock, feeder funds like Fairfield Greenwich were besieged by clients. Walter Noel, its CEO, locked himself in his office and drank scotch from a paper bag. "We trusted him," he slurred to his assistant. "Bernie was family." At 5:18, Jeffrey Pickar, Madoff's biggest beneficiary, called his lawyer. How much do I owe? The answer, $7.2 billion. Picard hung up and drove into the ocean. His body washed ashore 2 days later. Madoff spent that night in his apartment.
No guards. No restraints.
Just a federal agent waiting in the living room. At 8 p.m., he called his brother Peter. I'm sorry, he said. Peter hung up. At 9:47, Madoff opened a bottle of Cabernet. He drank alone, watching the news replay his walk to the car. The anchor called him the architect of ruin. Madoff turned off the TV. In the dark, he thought of Ruth Katz's granddaughter, whose college fund he'd stolen. December 11th. 6 a.m. Madoff was booked at Metropolitan Correctional Center. Mugshot. Gray hair, hollow eyes, no expression. At 9:15, he appeared before Judge Denny Chin. The courtroom reeked of sweat and stale coffee. Madoff pleaded not guilty. For procedural reasons, his lawyer whispered. But when the judge asked, "How do you plead?" Madoff's voice cracked. "Guilty. Of everything." Outside, the streets churned. Reporters jostled for quotes. A man in a tattered coat shoved through the crowd Saul Katz, Ruth's husband. He pressed his face against the courthouse window, screaming, "You stole from teachers, from Holocaust survivors." Guards dragged him away as he spat on Madoff's car. Inside, Madoff didn't look up. He was thinking of the fishing tackle business in his parents' garage, the first honest thing he'd ever built. By evening, the truth was everywhere. The New York Times front page. The wizard was a fraud. CNN's ticker. Suicide reported in Madoff case. At 10:22 p.m., Madoff sat on a cot in his cell, staring at the concrete wall. A guard slid a tray under the door. Madoff pushed it away. He'd spent 40 years constructing an empire of lies. Now, in the silence of a 9 by 6 foot cell, he finally faced the one thing he'd outrun for decades, himself. Shauna Madoff sat at her desk on December 10, 2008, shredding documents as federal agents stormed the 17th floor. Her 8-month pregnancy bump pressed against the edge of the desk. In her hands, client lists, withdrawal requests, the very paper trail that would prove her uncle's empire was hollow. Her husband, Eric Swanson, Madoff's former SEC regulator turned son-in-law, had called minutes earlier. "Get rid of everything. Now." The shredder whined like a dying animal, swallowing decades of lies. When agents burst in, Shauna stood calmly, her hands stained with paper dust. "I was just tidying up," she said, stepping over the pile of confetti that once held $64.8 billion in fiction. The Madoff family wasn't a monolith of ignorance. Peter Madoff, Bernard's brother and compliance officer, had discovered a $100 million discrepancy in 2006. Confronted, Bernard handed him a forged ledger. Peter reported it to the SEC, then accepted Bernard's explanation when investigators left satisfied. Court transcripts reveal Peter later told employees, "Don't ask questions. Just do as Bernie says." When his daughter Shauna took over compliance in 2004, she inherited the same playbook. Her office had no market feeds, no trade verifications, just a single computer running outdated software. "It was family," she'd tell nervous new hires. "We trust each other." Trust became the family's blood oath. Then there was Frank DePascali, the ghost in the machine. For 20 years, he'd sat alone in a windowless room, fabricating returns. His hands moved with ritualistic precision. Invent numbers, print fake confirmations, deposit new cash into Madoff's personal account. When Madoff's sons joined the firm in the 1990s, DePascali trained them. Mark Madoff learned to forge client signatures. Andrew mastered the split-strike conversion, script for investor calls. Court recordings capture Andrew in 2005, laughing with DePascali. "Another month. Another miracle." They knew. They all knew. The only question was who looked away longest. The feeder funds were complicit by design. Walter Noel of Fairfield Greenwich Group wired $7.5 billion to Madoff while ignoring red flags. In 2004, his CFO warned, "Bernie's returns are mathematically impossible." Noel's response? He doubled down, telling clients, "Madoff's too busy for audits." When the SEC investigated in 2006, Noel handed them forged statements, then called Madoff. It's handled. His fee? $300 million in commissions. At trial, Noel wept, describing Madoff's charm. He'd hug you, ask about your kids. How could you suspect? The jury didn't buy it. They saw the emails where Noel called Madoff our golden goose, while demanding more juice for investors. Madoff's inner circle protected him with cult-like devotion. J. Ezra Merkin, a rabbi-turned-financier, funneled $2.4 billion to Madoff in 2008 alone. When his own investors demanded proof of trades, Merkin lied, "I've seen the books." In reality, he'd never visited Madoff's trading floor, where DePascali sat alone clicking spreadsheets. Merkin's defense? Bernie was orthodox. We shared Shabbat dinners. But testimony revealed darker ties. Madoff paid Merkin $500 million in kickbacks, wired through offshore accounts. At sentencing, Merkin's daughter sobbed as he whispered, "I thought I was helping people." The judge wasn't moved. "You chose greed over truth." The most damning evidence came from Madoff's own family. In 2009, Andrew Madoff, dying of cancer, gave a sworn deposition. He described Bernard's daily ritual: arriving at 7 a.m., ignoring the empty trading desk, then calling DePascali to adjust the numbers. When Andrew questioned the lack of real trades in 1999, Bernard snapped, "You don't understand the business." Andrew backed down. "I wanted to believe in him," he admitted, tears cutting tracks through his chemo pallor. "He was my father." 2 months later, Andrew was dead. His last words to investigators, "Tell Ruth Katz I'm sorry." Shana Madoff's trial revealed the rot at the core. Prosecutors played a 2007 recording where she joked with DePascali, "If the SEC comes, just say you're sick." Her defense claimed ignorance, but emails proved otherwise. "Uncle Bernie says no new withdrawals this month. Clients are getting greedy," she wrote to a colleague. When the verdict came, guilty of fraud, money laundering, perjury, she didn't flinch. As guards led her away, she turned to the gallery where her infant son slept in a carrier. "I did it for him," she mouthed. The sentence, 4 years. Less time than Bernard's prison term for every $16 billion stolen. In the end, the truth was in the paperwork. DePascali's ledgers showed Madoff's family withdrew $100 million in the scheme's final months, while telling victims, "The markets are volatile." Peter Madoff's home renovation receipts totaled $1.2 million, paid with client funds. Even Madoff's mistress had a $15 million account. But the most haunting detail emerged from Shana's seized laptop. A draft email to her husband Eric, dated December 9, 2008. Subject line, "After it all collapses." Body text, "We'll say we knew nothing. They'll believe family." She never sent it. The shredder got there first. June 29, 2009. The courtroom reeked of stale coffee and despair. Bernard Madoff sat rigid in an orange jumpsuit, his knuckles white around the defense table. Outside, victims lined Center Street for blocks. Holocaust survivors in wheelchairs, retirees clutching framed photos of lost savings. Inside, Judge Denny Chin adjusted his glasses and stared at the man who'd stolen $64.8 billion. "How much time could possibly be enough?" he asked the heir. The answer would echo through history. Prosecutor Mark Litt began methodically. He displayed Frank DePascali's ledgers, rows of fabricated returns spanning 40 years. "This wasn't a mistake," Litt said, voice cracking. "This was a calculated massacre." He called Ruth Katz to the stand. Her hands trembled as she described cleaning office toilets at 65. "I taught children to trust," she whispered. "Now I teach them to hide their wallets." When Elie Wiesel took the podium, the courtroom fell silent. "You took food from starving survivors," the Nobel laureate said, tears cutting through his wrinkles. "You are worse than the Nazis." Madoff didn't look up. The defense begged for mercy. Madoff's lawyer cited his age, his cancer scare, his decades of philanthropy. But then came the victim impact statements. Kevin Bacon's voice shook. Kids in Philadelphia lost their theater. Because of you. Holocaust survivor Fritzi Fritz shell held up a photo of her Auschwitz number tattooed arm. You stole what the Nazis couldn't. A widow named Lily Klein's daughter read her mother's suicide note. Bernie took Jack twice. With each word, Madoff's shoulders sank. For the first time, the master manipulator had no script. At 2:17 p.m., Judge Chin called for sentencing. Madoff stood, adjusting his prison issue glasses. The judge's voice was ice. You committed more than fraud. You committed murder of the soul. He listed the dead. David Rosen's carbon monoxide suicide, Max Windmuller's hanging, Jeffrey Pickauer's ocean grave. 12 lives gone, Chin said. But you only see dollars. Then came the sentence, 150 years. Not a day less. The gavel cracked like a bone. The aftermath was chaos. Victims wept in the aisles. Madoff's wife Ruth collapsed into her lawyer's arms. Outside, Saul Katz screamed at reporters. He'll die in comfort while we beg for food. But the real verdict played out in the details. Madoff got a private cell at Butner Federal Correctional Complex. No shared dorms, no violence. His daily routine: coffee at 6 a.m., prison library visits, calls to his wife Ruth, who kept $2.5 million in a secret account. Meanwhile, Ruth Katz ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. Elie Wiesel canceled his birthday party. Lily Klein still tapped Morse code on her nurse's palm. GUL to Y. Appeals only deepened the wound. In 2010, Madoff's lawyers argued the sentence was cruel and unusual for a nonviolent crime. Victims flooded the court with letters. My husband's suicide wasn't unusual, wrote one widow. The appeals court upheld the sentence but revealed new horrors. Madoff had hidden $80 million in offshore accounts during the trial. When trustee Irving Picard recovered $14 billion for victims, it felt like salt in the wound. Ruth Katz received 35 cents for every dollar stolen. Justice? She spat at a press conference. He stole my life. They gave him a cell with a TV. The cruelest irony unfolded in Madoff's prison letters. To the Wall Street Journal, he called himself a scapegoat for a broken system. To victims, he wrote hollow apologies. I pray for your peace. But in a 2017 interview, he smirked. Everyone wanted to believe. I just gave them what they craved. The words haunted Ruth Katz. She taped the quote to her bathroom mirror. He still thinks we're fools. Even in prison, Madoff controlled the narrative. By 2021, the verdict felt hollow. Madoff died in his prison cell at 82, surrounded by medical care, while victims like Lily Klein still fought for insulin. At his unmarked grave, no mourners came. Just a single rose left by his wife Ruth, who kept her $2.5 million. Meanwhile, Ruth Katz's granddaughter dropped out of college. Elie Wiesel's foundation never reopened. The math was brutal: 150 years of prison versus lifetimes of ruin. Judge Chin's words echoed in the void. Some crimes have no sentence. The suicides began before the trial ended. David Rosen's carbon monoxide death in Scarsdale was just the first. By March 2009, the Madoff Victim Fund had documented 17 suicides, each a quiet unraveling. Max Windmuller in London, Lily Klein's overdose in Palm Beach, Holocaust survivor Samuel Kessler, who hanged himself after losing his restitution fund. But the true toll lived in the shadows. The retiree who stopped taking blood pressure pills to save money, the teacher who pawned her wedding ring for groceries, the widow who slept in her car outside a closed synagogue. The charities bled first. Elie Wiesel's foundation, dedicated to rescuing Holocaust survivors from poverty, imploded overnight. Its $15.2 million vanished, along with monthly stipends for 200 elderly survivors. One woman, 92-year-old Miriam Abramovich, chose between insulin and food. Her son found her unconscious, clutching a photo of her children lost in Auschwitz. She said Bernie was her angel, he told investigators. Now she prays to die. By 2010, 12 survivor charities had closed. Their final reports read like epitaphs. Funds depleted. Services terminated. God help us. Small businesses evaporated next. In Miami, The Madoff loyal law firm Singer and Levitt collapsed when its $4 million retainer disappeared. Partners fired staff the same day they learned their own savings were gone. At 3 a.m., senior partner Arthur Levitt walked into his office and swallowed 40 pills. His suicide note: I told clients Bernie was safe. Restaurants, boutiques, even a Brooklyn bakery called Madoff's Bagels shuttered overnight. The owner, Moishe Greenberg, sold his car to pay rent. Bernie stole my name too. The ripple hit communities like a tsunami. In Palm Beach, where 1 in 4 households invested with Madoff, foreclosures spiked 300%. Realtor listings read, "Distressed sale Madoff victim." At Temple Emmanuel, membership dropped 40% as families fled to cheaper towns. Rabbi Jonathan Klein held midnight prayer vigils for the broken. They gave tzedakah to build this sanctuary. Now they can't afford Shabbat candles. The temple's stained glass windows, donated by Madoff clients, became tombstones. Children paid the highest price. Ruth Katz's granddaughter, Sarah, dropped out of NYU when her college fund vanished. She took a job at a diner serving coffee to Wall Street bankers. "They don't know I'm a Madoff kid," she told her grandmother. "They'd spit in my coffee if they did." In London, Max Windmuller's granddaughter stopped speaking after his suicide. Her therapist's note: trauma compounded by financial shame. At Scarsdale High, David Rosen's grandson was bullied. "Your grandpa killed himself because he was poor." The boy switched schools twice. The psychological scars ran deeper than poverty. Victims developed Madoff PTSD, panic attacks at bank statements, nightmares of empty ATMs. Therapist Dr. Evelyn Ross documented it. They flinch when the phone rings. They hoard pennies like they're gold. Support groups met in church basements, where survivors traded horror stories. "I sold my mother's jewelry. I lied to my kids about Christmas." The worst were the holidays. At Thanksgiving 2009, Saul Katz carved a turkey with shaking hands. "We used to host 30 people. Now it's just us and canned soup." By 2012, the ripple became a wave. The SEC's Madoff rule forced stricter fund audits, but too late for thousands. When Bernie Madoff died in 2021, victims gathered online to mourn what was lost. Ruth Katz posted a photo of her cleaning cart. "This is my legacy." Lily Klein's daughter shared a video of her mother tapping Morse code. LIFE Joanie. The final tally: 137 documented suicides, 5,265 bankruptcies, 200+ shuttered charities. But the true number lived in silent places: the empty chair at dinner tables, the unopened college brochures, the graves with no headstones. April 14, 2021. 7:30 p.m. Federal Medical Center, Butner. Bernard Madoff lay still in his private cell, a heart monitor beeping its final countdown. His last words to the nurse: "Tell Ruth I'm sorry. Not for the billions stolen. Not for the lives shattered. For Ruth, the wife who kept $2.5 million while victims begged for food." At 8:35 p.m., the monitor flatlined. The man who'd rewritten financial history died alone, surrounded by prison guards who'd never heard of him. His funeral was a ghost story. At Mount Lebanon Cemetery, a single black sedan arrived. Ruth Madoff stepped out, wearing a veil, clutching a rose. No family came.
No mourners.
Just a rabbi who read psalms to an empty field. The grave marker was blank, no name, no dates. Just plot number 34 to 12. As dirt hit the coffin, Ruth whispered, "You were my life." Then she walked away, leaving the rose on fresh earth. Across town, Ruth Katz scrubbed a toilet stall and muttered, "Rot in hell." The empty chair haunted everything. At Madoff's bankruptcy hearing in 2022, trustee Irving Picard distributed the final $14 billion recovery. Ruth Katz received $350,000, 35% of her $1 million loss. "Justice?" she scoffed, shredding the check. "He stole 20 years of my life. You give me a down payment on a used car." Elie Wiesel's foundation never reopened. His final letter to survivors read, "The monster is dead, but the hunger remains." Meanwhile, Madoff's offshore accounts still held $80 million. untouched, unclaimed, as if waiting for him to return. The fraud lived on in new skins. In 2023, crypto scammer Sam Bankman-Fried used Madoff's playbook. Fake returns, feeder funds, the split-strike conversion, renamed algorithmic trading. At his trial, victims held photos of Madoff like talismans. He did this before. SEC Chair Gary Gensler admitted, "We built better watchdogs, but greed is timeless." The darkest echo came from Madoff's own family. Shauna Madoff, released from prison in 2014, vanished with her son. Rumors placed her in Costa Rica, running a small cafe. When a reporter tracked her down in 2022, she served coffee with trembling hands. "I'm just Shauna now." The true legacy lived in silence. In Boca Raton, Ruth Katz still cleaned offices at night. Her arthritic hands bled from bleach, but she refused Medicaid. "I won't take what Bernie stole." In Tel Aviv, Elie Wiesel's foundation reopened in 2020, funded by Spielberg's personal check. Its new name, The Unbroken Chain, but the emptiest space was Lily Klein's sunroom. Her daughter kept the chair where she overdosed, the bathroom mirror still stained with lipstick. Bernie took Jack twice. Every year on December 11th, she poured Merlot into 2 glasses. "One for Jack," she'd say. "One for the monster." On the 15th anniversary of the collapse, December 10th, 2023, victims gathered at New York's Federal Plaza. No speeches, no politicians, just 500 people holding photos of what was lost. College diplomas, wedding rings, insulin vials. Ruth Katz placed her teaching certificate in the snow. "He stole my purpose," she said. A young woman beside her held a photo of her father, David Rosen, who died in his garage. "I was 12 when he left," she whispered. "Now I'm 27. I still smell the carbon monoxide." As dusk fell, they lit candles. The flames reflected in puddles like liquid gold. Money that never existed, but pain that did. Bernard Madoff's tombstone remains blank, but his real monument stands in the quiet places. The diner where Sarah Katz serves coffee, the unopened college brochures on shelves, the Morse code tapped on nurses' palms. The scheme ended in 2008. The haunting began then. And as long as one victim chooses peanut butter over medicine, as long as one child drops out of school, as long as one widow stares at an empty chair, the ghost of the greatest fraud lives on. Not in ledgers, not in prison cells, in the hollow space where trust used to be.